Hello, everyone, friends. I want to ask you, have you ever caught yourself thinking that life is the craziest playwright in the world? We often rely on mundane facts from textbooks, but reality is much more inventive. Today, you'll discover the mysterious 9-meter log that has been controlling the weather in Oregon for over 100 years. Learn about a Japanese marathon runner whose race lasted an astonishing 54 years, and hear about an entire city in Alaska where residents avoid going outside for years because the whole town is just one single high-rise building. Before we dive in, please support us with a like and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. It really helps our channel grow. So, are you ready to be amazed? Get comfortable, we're starting. Story number 1. The ancient log that managed the weather. Picture the deepest lake in the United States, Crater Lake in Oregon. The water is so blue that it seems as if someone tipped a tank full of ink into it. The silence is so profound that it rings in your ears. This place resembles a natural temple, but there is one detail that has left scientists scratching their heads for over a century. In this lake lives an old man. And no, he's not a hermit with a beard, nor is he an ancient monster. It's an ordinary log, at first glance, a 9-meter piece of Canadian cedar. It may seem like just a floating piece of wood. What's the big deal? But here's the odd part. This log floats not horizontally like normal logs, but vertically, like a buoy or a submarine periscope that has forgotten to dive. About 1 meter and 20 centimeters of sun-bleached wood stick out of the water, while the rest is hidden in the dark, icy depths. And the most astonishing thing is, it neither sinks nor decays. The first to notice it was geologist Joseph Diller. This was in 1896. Diller made a note in his journal, shrugged, and left. 5 years later he returned, and lo and behold, the old man was still there, proudly sticking out of the water, swaying with the waves. Since then, the log has been monitored as closely as a Hollywood star. You might think, well, maybe it just got wedged against some rocks below. But no. Crater Lake is deep, with some areas reaching 600 meters. The old man is completely free. He is quite the traveler. In 1938, scientists decided to observe him seriously. Over 3 months, this wooden pilgrim covered almost 100 kilometers, moving chaotically across the lake as if patrolling his territory. The physics behind this phenomenon remains a topic of debate among hydrologists. Why doesn't he tip over? Why hasn't the water saturated it enough in over 100 years to pull it to the bottom? One theory suggests that when the tree fell into the water, most likely in the 19th century, its roots got entangled in rocks. The rocks served as an anchor, causing the trunk to take a vertical position. Over time, the rocks fell away, but the lower part of the log became soaked with water, making it heavier than the upper part. A perfect balance, a natural weeble. But that's all the boring science. The most intriguing part started in 1988, and this is no longer a theory, but a fact documented in ship logs. That year, researchers decided to study the lake using a submarine. However, an old man, rather annoyingly, kept lingering in the diving zone. Navigating there was tricky, and they were reluctant to risk their expensive equipment. So, the scientists opted to do something no one had ever thought of before. They captured the old man, tied him with a rope, and towed him back to shore, securing him to some rocks in a quiet bay. Just sit here for a while, Grandpa, and don't disrupt progress. And this is where reality went awry. The moment they restricted the elderly man's freedom, the sky above Crater Lake darkened. The clear, sunny summer sky was shrouded by leaden clouds. A storm began. But it wasn't just a light rain, it was a full-blown snowstorm. In August, temperatures plummeted and visibility dropped to zero. Working became impossible. The scientists huddled in their tents, shivering from the cold, watching the raging lake. This went on for several hours until someone from the team, perhaps jokingly or perhaps out of superstitious fear, suggested, "Hey, could this be because of the old man? We've tied him up and the lake doesn't like it." Sounds ridiculous, right? But when a $1,000 expedition is falling apart, you're ready to believe in forest spirits. They went and untied the rope, setting the old man free. And you know what? The snow virtually stopped instantly. The clouds dispersed and the sun reappeared. The lake calmed down. Coincidence? Skeptics would argue. Certainly it was an atmospheric front, pressure changes, mountainous terrain. However, local rangers have since tried to leave the old man undisturbed. Let him float. If the lake has a guardian, he appears as a relic of an old tree that refuses to sink and adhere to the laws of physics. We often believe we can control nature, study it, measure it, and tether it with ropes. Yet sometimes, all it takes is to loosen the rope for the storm to settle. This is a valuable lesson imparted to us by the silent piece of wood. By the way, friends, for the most curious, I've left links to all the original sources in the description. Feel free to check them out, and let's move on. Story number 2. The physicist who purred and dozed on his keyboard. Science is a serious business. People in white coats, glasses with thick frames, formulas that make your head spin, and absolute silence in libraries. It might seem that there's no room for jokes here, but sometimes it is within the walls of strict universities that the most absurd and endearing tales are born, which you probably won't find in a quantum mechanics textbook. Let's travel back to 1975, Michigan State University. Professor of Physics Jack Hetherington had just completed the most significant work of his life, or at least a very important paper on atomic behavior at ultra-low temperatures. He was pleased. The text was perfect. The data aligned, and he was about to send the manuscript to the most prestigious scientific journal of the time, Physical Review Letters. But before sending it off, he decided to show it to a colleague, just to be safe. The colleague skimmed through the text, nodded, and uttered one single phrase that nearly derailed Hetherington's career. "Jack, excellent job, but you have a problem with pronouns here. You keep saying we. We discovered. We calculated. Yet the author is only you. So what? It may seem like a minor detail. In scientific writing, we sounds more authoritative, but the journal's editorial office is known for its strictness. They have a hard and fast rule. If there is a single author, they must write I. If we is used, there must be at least 2 authors or the manuscript will simply be returned without being read. Imagine Jack's horror. Back in those days, there were no computers with a find and replace button. Everything was typed on typewriters. Rewriting the whole paper while correcting every we to I? That would take days, and deadlines were looming, leaving him despondent. At that moment, the professor's gaze fell upon the corner of the office. There, curled up in a cozy chair, was his best friend Chester, fast asleep. Chester was a Siamese cat. He loved milk, napping on warm papers, and sometimes he would meow loudly when Jack had been immersed in calculations for too long. Hetherington thought, why not? If the journal needs a second author for the word we, they shall have one. However, just adding Chester as a co-author wouldn't look credible. Science demands a certain gravitas. Thus, Jack devised a pseudonym for him. He combined the cat's name with his father's name, Willard, and the scientific classification of the domestic cat, Felis domesticus. Thus, the esteemed scientist F.D.K. Willard was created. The paper was submitted, and you know what? It was accepted and published. It gained success. Physicists all over the country cited Hetherington and Willard's work, marveling at the depth of their joint analysis, unaware that the second author at that time was busy chasing a candy wrapper. The secret became public quite by accident and in a rather amusing way. One day, an important guest visited the university to discuss the paper personally with the authors. Hetherington was not present. "Where is the co-author, Dr. Willard?" the guest asked the department secretary. The secretary, possibly tired of this comedy, silently pointed to the cat who was licking his paw right on the professor's desk. There was no scandal. Strangely enough, the scientific community was thrilled. Cat Willard became a celebrity. He was even offered a professorship, jokingly, of course. Colleagues began sending him letters, and it is said that Hetherington sometimes replied by stamping a paw print dipped in ink. F.D.K. Willard became the only cat in history whose academic career was officially documented. This story reminds us that even within the strictest of rules, there is always a loophole for friendship and a good laugh. Sometimes, to solve a complex problem, one only needs to look at who is sleeping in your chair. But if you think that animals in human history merely slept or inadvertently made their way into scientific journals, you are mistaken. Some of them worked harder than you and me. Story number 3. An aristocratic sparrow in the London Underground, the Metropolitan. This is a world unto itself, a city beneath a city. Noise, crowds, haste. People rush to work, read newspapers, doze off, and no one looks around. Yet sometimes, if one lifts their gaze from their phone, they might witness something that makes them question the reality of what is unfolding. In 1994, at one of the London Underground stations, somewhere deep underground, a bird settled in, a common house sparrow. Nothing remarkable there. A brown bundle of feathers chirping beneath the concrete tunnel's arches. It likely flew in accidentally through a ventilation shaft, or perhaps clung to someone's backpack. And this sparrow began its small life in the subway. At first, it was merely amusing. Commuters waiting for their trains would smile as they watched it hopping around the platform, gathering crumbs from sandwiches. Some would toss it a piece of bread, others a cookie. The sparrow, let's call him Jack, even though he probably had a more dignified name, quickly realized he was being fed better here than above ground. It was warm, dry, and there were no predatory cats or mischievous boys with slingshots around. However, Jack turned out to be more than just a freeloader. He was an aesthetic. One morning during rush hour, a woman stood on the platform eating a croissant. Fresh, crispy, just from the bakery. Jack flew over, perched on her shoulder, and delicately plucked a morsel. The woman gasped in surprise, but then laughed. "What a little rascal," she exclaimed, extending the remnants to him. Jack accepted the treat with dignity. Word of the gourmet sparrow spread throughout London faster than the trains. People began to deliberately visit this station just to feed the bird. And it was no ordinary fare. Jack was treated not to stale bread, but to French pastries, almond cookies, and chocolate muffins. Someone even brought him a piece of expensive brie cheese. Jack established a routine. In the morning, he greeted the first passengers, hopping around the turnstiles as if checking tickets. During the quieter midday hours, he would rest on advertising boards, preening his feathers while singing songs that echoed along the walls of the tunnel. And in the evening, when weary office workers headed home, he would resume his quest for delicacies. It seemed idyllic, but in any fairy tale there is a villain, or at least a strict authority figure. The management of the subway began to worry. A bird in the underground was unsanitary. There were droppings on benches and potential safety hazards. What if it flew into the driver's cab? A decision was made. The sparrow had to be removed. A real operation ensued. A team of bird catchers was dispatched to the station with nets, traps, and baits. They set up cages filled with the most delicious grains. But Jack was no fool. He ignored the traps, preferring the croissants from passengers' hands. It was as if he sensed he was being hunted and became more cautious. Catchers returned again and again, week after week, yet each time Jack slipped away. He would hide in the highest nooks, fly from platform to platform right in front of trains, vanish into tunnels, and reappear once the danger passed. The passengers rallied to protect their beloved sparrow. Articles began to appear in newspapers with headlines like, "Hands off Jack," and "Freedom for the Underground Sparrow." People wrote petitions and called the city hall. The sparrow became a symbol of a small rebellion against the system, against the drab daily rules. In the end, the subway management gave in. They shrugged and said, "All right, let him live." And Jack continued to live for several more years. He became a local legend. Tourists took pictures of him, children created postcards. He lived in the subway far longer than typical street sparrows. Perhaps it was due to good nutrition and the absence of predators, or maybe it was simply because he was loved. When Jack passed away, he died of old age, quietly and peacefully in his nest tucked under the ceiling. An unofficial announcement appeared at the station, handwritten by one of the passengers. It read, "Here lived Jack, the politest passenger of the London Underground. Thank you for the crumbs and the songs." This story reminds us that even in the most soulless machinery of a big city, there is always space for a living soul. And sometimes, a small sparrow can unite thousands of people better than any politician. And if you think that animals are only capable of petty antics like stealing croissants, you're mistaken. Sometimes they change the course of entire nations' histories. Story number 4. A plan that was never officially approved, yet everyone followed it. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you simply started? Without permission, without bosses, without a budget. Just took the initiative and did something that seemed utterly impossible. And then found out that this was exactly what everyone had been waiting for. Welcome to 1993, New York, the subway. Yes, it's the subway again, but this one is entirely different. In those years, the underground of the Big Apple was, to put it mildly, not the most pleasant place. Dirt, confusing announcements, tangled maps. Tourists got lost, locals complained. Navigating it was harder than solving a labyrinth designed by the Minotaur. And it was in this chaos that a man named Massimo Vignelli appeared. Massimo was a legendary designer, thoroughly Italian. Elegant, dressed in a black suit, he had a passion for order, clean lines, and the Helvetica font. When he looked at the New York subway map, he was horrified. It wasn't a map, it was a plate of spaghetti. Everything was tangled, the lines were crooked, and the colors were murky. "This is a disgrace," said Massimo. "I will fix this." The problem was that no one had asked him to. The city's transit authority, MTA, had not put out a tender. They had no budget for a redesign and were generally satisfied. It worked. Trains were running, so why bother? But Massimo was determined. He assembled a small team in his office, just a couple of people, and began working evenings and weekends for free, simply because he was irritated by the ugliness. He aimed to simplify everything, removing unnecessary details, straightening lines, and turning the map into something not geographically accurate, but logically understandable, like a wiring diagram. He spent a year sketching, drawing, and debating with colleagues. Ultimately, his efforts resulted in a masterpiece. A map where all lines ran at 45 or 90 angles. The colors were bright and clean. Stations were marked with dots. No superfluous details of parks and streets above, just the essence. Once the work was completed, Massimo went to the MTA uninvited. He simply placed his map on the desk of the chief official and said, "Here, make use of this." The official looked at the map, then onto Massimo, and then back to the map. "However, we didn't place an order with you." "I know," replied the designer, "but this is better than what you currently have." And then, a miracle happened. Instead of dismissing the brash one, the official began to contemplate. The map was indeed beautiful, clear, and modern. "How much do you want for this?" he inquired. Massimo quoted a nominal fee. He didn't require money. What he needed was for millions of people to stop wandering in the dark. The MTA accepted the map. It was printed, hung in all the stations, and a scandal erupted. Residents of New York were outraged. "Where is my favorite park?" some shouted. "Why is Central Park square? It's rectangular," others protested. "The water is beige, not blue. Is this a desert?" wondered a third group. People had become accustomed to geographical accuracy, albeit an inconvenient one. Massimo's abstraction felt like a mockery to them. The map was dubbed a beautiful lie. Ultimately, under public pressure, it was replaced with a more traditional one after a few years. However, that was not the end of the story. Time passed, ushering in the era of smartphones and apps. Suddenly, it turned out that for small phone screens, the Vignelli map was perfect. It was more readable than any other. Today, this incorrect map is considered a classic of global design. It hangs in the Museum of Modern Art, and many transport applications utilize its principles. Massimo Vignelli proved, sometimes you must do what you believe is right, even if no one asks you, and even if you're not understood at first. Time will put everything in its proper place. Now, in the following story, one person's initiative led to far stranger and more far-reaching consequences than merely debates over design. It's about an entire island that accidentally appeared on the map. Story number 5. The island that didn't exist, yet taxes were paid on it. Have you ever heard of a place called the Kingdom of Redonda? Chances are you haven't. And that's not surprising. This tiny uninhabited island in the Caribbean Sea is only 1.5 kilometers long. A rock jutting out of the water, covered in cacti and bird droppings. There is no water, electricity, or inhabitants. One might wonder who needs such a piece of stone. In 1865, an Irishman named Matthew Dowie Shiel lived. A merchant, a dreamer, and evidently a man with a great sense of humor. When his son was born, Matthew decided to present him with an unusual birthday gift. Not a toy, not a pony, but an entire kingdom. He sailed to this forgotten Redonda island, made landfall, which was no easy feat due to the steep cliffs, drank a bottle of rum, and declared himself King Philippe I, with his newborn son as heir apparent. "From now until forever," he said to the seagulls, "this is the land of free people." Well, there were no people, so the seagulls didn't mind. Matthew sent a letter to Queen Victoria. In it, he politely requested her recognition of his sovereignty over the island, promising not to wage war on the British Empire. It seems the Queen's office had a laugh, but responded, "Do as you wish, just don't interfere with trade." Thus, the strangest micronation in the world came into being. A kingdom without subjects, but with a king. Years passed, and the son grew up to become the science fiction writer Matthew Phipps Shell. Upon the death of his father, he inherited the throne. King Philip II approached the situation with a creative mindset. Since there were no subjects to govern, he decided to establish an aristocracy, not from dukes and earls by birthright, but from the intellectual elite. He began bestowing titles upon his friends who were writers, poets, and artists. Imagine sitting in a London pub, enjoying a beer, when suddenly someone approaches you and says, "Sir, for your magnificent poetry, I bestow upon you the title Duke of Redonda." Sounds like the ramblings of a madman? Perhaps, but people accepted these titles. It was enjoyable and became prestigious within certain circles. Notable literary figures of the time received titles such as Duke, Archbishop, and Admiral of the Grant. The Kingdom of Redonda transformed into a sort of exclusive club for the bohemian lifestyle. They gathered in cafes to discuss literature, enjoy wine, and addressed one another as Your Grace. However, the most amusing events unfolded later. Upon the passing of the writer-king, he left no direct heirs, leading to a battle for the throne. Several individuals declared themselves the rightful kings of Redonda. One claimed that Shell had transferred him the rights on a napkin in a bar. Another insisted he was a distant relative, while a third simply purchased a beautiful crown. At one point, Redonda boasted 9 kings simultaneously, all residing in different countries, issuing proclamations, minting coins for collectors, and distributing titles. One of the kings, residing in Antigua, even attempted to pay taxes for the island. The British authorities politely declined, yet he persisted, sending checks through the mail. Today, the legitimate king is considered to be the Spanish writer Javier Marías. He takes his title with irony but continues the tradition, awarding the literary prize of the Kingdom of Redonda and granting duchy titles. Among the dukes is the Hollywood director Francis Ford Coppola. Thus, a barren rock in the ocean has become a symbol that a kingdom is not about land and castles, but rather a state of mind and good company. And now for the next tale. This one concerns not a fictional kingdom, but a very real country that once decided to change its borders in a rather unconventional manner, using a shovel and a bucket. Story number 6. The farmer who accidentally altered the country's map with the help of a cow. Have you ever contemplated how fragile borders can be? We tend to think of them as something immutable, barbed wire, boundary posts, maps drawn in the offices of generals. Yet sometimes, history decides to forego formalities and allows livestock to draw the borders. Listen to the story of how one stubborn cow nearly rewrote the map of the United States and the British Empire. It was the year 1859 on San Juan Island, located between the state of Washington and Vancouver Island, a wild, misty place filled with forests and tall grass. At that time, this island was a subject of dispute between Americans and the British. Both sides claimed it as their own, and each begrudgingly tolerated the presence of the other. On the island, lived American farmers and British workers from the Hudson's Bay Company. To say they coexisted harmoniously would be an overstatement. Yet they managed to avoid open conflicts until the arrival of a particular cow. This cow belonged to a British man employed by the company and, apparently, she had quite the adventurous palate. One morning, she decided that the grass in the adjacent field, owned by an American farmer named Cotler, was far richer and sweeter. She jumped over or squeezed through the fence and leisurely began to munch on someone else's potatoes. Cotler, seeing his garden turning into a dining area for an unwelcome animal, was consumed by rage. He grabbed his gun and did something he would regret for the rest of his life. He shot the cow. It may seem trivial, a cow and a farmer, but in the context of the prevailing political tension, it ignited a powder keg. The British demanded the arrest of Cotler. The Americans retorted that the cow was to blame for trespassing on private property. Words escalated into action, and soon, a contingent of American soldiers landed on the island, led by Captain George Pickett. In response, the British dispatched 3 warships. Picture this: fog, the tranquil island, wooded shores, and warships in the bay, ready to fire their cannons over a single row of potatoes. Soldiers from both sides dug trenches, while officers exchanged furious letters. The situation was reaching a boiling point. If anyone had fired a shot, it could have sparked a full-blown war between 2 global powers, a conflict that could alter the course of history. But then, something extraordinary happened. Rather than shooting, the soldiers began to communicate. They discovered they had much in common. They shared coffee, played cards, held foot races, and even exchanged drinks. American and British soldiers huddled around campfires, laughing and discussing the absurdity of their predicament. They recognized that going to war over a cow was, to put it mildly, ridiculous. News of what became known as the Pig War, despite the fact that it all started with a cow, eventually reached Washington and London. Presidents and kings were left in disbelief. Were they truly prepared to send thousands of people to their deaths over a potato field? A compromise was ultimately reached. A commission was dispatched to the island and ruled that both sides should temper their zeal. The soldiers were withdrawn, and the island was to be divided in half until a final resolution could be established. This peace lasted a full 12 years. For 12 years, both American and British citizens lived together on the island, jointly managing it and maintaining order. In 1872, international arbitration officially awarded San Juan Island to the United States. Thus, thanks to one very hungry cow, 2 stubborn farmers, and the common sense of ordinary soldiers, a significant tragedy was averted. This story teaches us an important lesson. Even the most monumental conflicts can sometimes stem from minor issues. And, perhaps more importantly, they can often be resolved not through weapons, but through a simple human conversation over a cup of coffee. Story number 7. A state constructed from concrete and seagulls. We often fantasize about having our own island, far away from bosses, taxes, and neighbors with drills. However, few have the courage to turn this dream into reality, especially when there are no islands to speak of. Listen to the tale of the smallest, most stubborn, and perhaps the most bizarre self-proclaimed nation in the world, the Principality of Sealand. It all began in 1967. In the North Sea, 7 nautical miles from the coast of England, stood an abandoned military platform from World War II. An iron giant on 2 concrete legs jutting out of the water, rusty, buffeted by all winds, teeming with seagulls as its only inhabitants. It was of no use to anyone. Except for one retired British Army major, Paddy Roy Bates. Paddy was a man of character. He wanted to launch his own pirate radio station to play rock and roll that the BBC disapproved of at the time. But British laws prohibited broadcasting without a license. Paddy looked at the map and realized the RFS Tower platform was located in international waters, meaning British laws did not apply there. On Christmas Eve, he took his family, his wife Joan, son Michael, and daughter Penelope, loaded their belongings onto a boat, and set foot on the platform. "I declare this territory to be the independent Principality of Sealand," he shouted into the stormy sky. And, as any true prince would, he promptly raised his flag, fashioned from an old sheep belonging to Joan, and proclaimed his wife as princess. The British government initially chuckled. Well, let the oddball play Robinson Crusoe, and he'll be back. But Paddy had no intention of returning. He set up a home on the platform, brought in generators, stocked up on food, and even started issuing passports to his friends. The authorities began to get anxious. They dispatched a Coast Guard boat to politely ask the prince to vacate the governmental property. Paddy greeted them not with peace offerings but with a warning shot into the air from an old rifle. "This is the territory of a sovereign state," he declared. "Any intrusion would be considered an act of war." The British backed down. They did not want an international scandal over a rusty metal object. The matter ended up in court, and that's when the incredible happened. The judge, upon reviewing the maritime law at the time, ruled, since the platform is beyond the 3-mile limit of territorial waters, it indeed falls outside the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom. PDV wins. Sealand began to thrive. They established a constitution, currency, the Sealand dollar pegged to the US dollar, and even issued postage stamps. They even granted noble titles. Anyone could become an earl or a baron of Sealand for a small fee. But the story does not end there. In 1978, a coup occurred in Sealand. While Paddy was in England for negotiations, a group of Dutch and German businessmen landed on the platform. They arrived by helicopter, supposedly to discuss a casino's construction, but instead, they took the prince's son Michael hostage and announced their takeover. Upon learning of this, Paddy refused to call the police. What does the police look like in another country? He gathered friends, rented a helicopter, and launched an assault on his own platform. The airborne operation was a success. The invaders surrendered without a fight. PDI raised its flag once more. The captives were released, except for one citizen of Sealand who had betrayed the prince. He was charged with treason and put in solitary confinement. Germany demanded the release of its citizen. Britain washed its hands of the matter. It's not our territory. Consequently, a German diplomat arrived at the platform to negotiate with Prince Roy. In theory, there was a glimmer of recognition. This was, in fact, an acknowledgement of his state by another country. The captive was set free. Sealand continued its existence. Petroy Bates passed away in 2012, but his legacy endures. The principality is now ruled by his son Michael. The platform still stands in the sea, having weathered fires, storms, and attempts of piracy. They have their own website, a national football team that competes with other unrecognized nations, and even an online souvenir shop. This story illustrates that if you believe strongly enough in something, even a rusty structure in the middle of the sea can become your kingdom, and no one can take it away as long as you are willing to defend your dream. Story number 8. The Man Who Walked Beneath New York City. If you live in a large city, you have likely wondered, what lies beneath my feet? Pipes? Wires? Rats? Subways? What if I told you that there could be an entire world down there, created by one person who simply loved to dig? Let me introduce you to the tale of Alfred Ely Beach, an inventor, a dreamer, and perhaps the most elegant mole in history. 1869. New York is suffocating in traffic. Horses, carriages, mud, and noise. The city is growing upward, but moving through it is becoming impossible. Beach, a young and ambitious editor of Scientific American, observes this chaos and thinks, we need to go underground. However, there is a problem. Power in the city belongs to the corrupt politician William Boss Tweed. Tweed controls all transportation services, omnibuses, and streetcars. There is no incentive for him to have a subway. Any effort to build an underground line would be swiftly blocked. Beach realizes that obtaining official permission would be impossible, so he decides to be clever. He applies for a permit to construct a pneumatic mail system, 2 small tubes for sending letters beneath Broadway. Boss Tweed laughs and signs off on the permit. Let him play with his little tubes, it doesn't bother anyone. But Beach had no intention of building a mail system. He envisioned something grand. Under the cover of night, in the basement of a clothing store on Broadway, he begins to dig secretly. Along with a group of trusted workers, they remove dirt in bags, disguising it as trash. They work quietly so as not to raise suspicion from neighbors and the police. Over 58 nights, they excavated a tunnel 95 meters long, right under the noses of the corrupt officials. But this was not just a dirty tunnel. Oh no. Beach was an aesthetic. He wanted to show that underground transport could be luxurious. Imagine descending into the basement of an ordinary store, opening a door, and entering a fairy tale. Walls built from white bricks surround the scene. Gas lamps illuminate the space with their glow, housed in crystal shades. A grand piano occupies the room. Yes, indeed, a genuine piano, being played by a musician. A fountain with golden fish dances amidst it all. Plump sofas are available for those waiting. And in the center of this splendor sits a train car. Not a dirty metal one, but a wooden car with velvet seats equipped to accommodate 22 passengers. Yet the most astonishing aspect is the engine. This car had no wheels powered by a motor. Instead, it was propelled by air. A massive fan generated pressure in a tube, causing the car to glide smoothly along the tracks through the tunnel. Later, the fan was switched to intake mode, allowing the car to return. In February 1870, Beach unveiled his creation to the public. Admission was a quarter, and a throng of people surged in. They could hardly believe their eyes. It was a marvel of engineering and comfort. They traveled back and forth, enjoyed the music, and marveled at the fish. Within the first year, 400,000 individuals experienced the attraction. Boss Tweed was furious. He felt deceived. A competitor to his tram was built right under his nose. He attempted to shut down the subway, sending in inspections and making threats, but public opinion remained firmly on Beach's side. It seemed like a victory. Unfortunately, in 1873, a stock market crash occurred. Investors went bankrupt. There were no funds left for further construction, and soon, Beach himself passed away. The tunnel was abandoned, its entrance sealed, and the luxurious subway was forgotten for many years. It became an urban legend. Only in 1912, during the construction of a modern subway line, did workers break through a wall and gasp in astonishment. Before them lay that very tunnel, decayed yet still displaying remnants of its former grandeur, the rusted remains of the car, the remnants of the piano, and a desiccated fountain. Beach's pneumatic subway never evolved into a transportation system for New York, but it demonstrated that even a single person armed with a shovel and a bold idea could challenge the system and create something beautiful. And though it lasted only briefly, it gifted people a vision of a future without traffic and filth. The ninth story unfolds. A state anchored amidst the sands. Picture the heat, not just the ordinary summer warmth, but that sticky and relentless discomfort that can only be found in the desert. Surrounding you is yellow sand, a blue sky, and 14 massive cargo ships frozen in the middle of a lake. They are stationary. Their engines are silent. This situation drags on not just for a day, 2 days, or even a month. Listen closely, for this tale is about how 3,000 sailors unwittingly created their own state while the rest of the world was wrapped up in grand politics. It was June 1967, the Suez Canal, the shortest route from Europe to Asia. 14 ships from various countries, including Britain, Germany, Poland, Bulgaria, France, and even Czechoslovakia, found themselves stuck in limbo. But unexpectedly, the world around them erupted. A conflict ignited. The canal was quickly blocked. Old ships were sunk on both sides to prevent passage. The 14 vessels found themselves trapped in a vast, bitter lake, a widening of the canal in the middle. The sailors thought, well, we'll wait a couple of days until everything calms down. They were mistaken. They remained stuck there for 8 years. 8. Imagine the scenario. You are a sailor. Your job is to sail, but you are at a standstill. All around you is sand and salty water. Initially, there was panic, then despair, and eventually a sense of thrill emerged. Since we are here for a long time, the captains decided to make this place livable. The sailors established an association known as the Great Bitter Lake, but in reality, it was a fully functioning state with its own laws and currency, and, incredibly, It even had its own postal service. Hold on, it was the 60s. No internet, just letters. They created stamps on scraps of linoleum and carved seals out of bottle caps. And guess what? Postal services around the world recognized those stamps. Letters from the Bitter Lake reached recipients in Europe and America. But that's not all. In 1968, during the actual Olympic Games in Mexico City, the sailors decided to hold their own right there, on the decks and in the water. The Olympics of the Bitter Lake. They competed in diving, weightlifting, and even football. Speaking of football, how do you play it on a ship? Quite simply, the Polish vessel had the largest and smoothest deck. It became the official stadium. They held tournaments between teams from various countries. Imagine a desert all around, the scorching sun, and on the deck of a freighter, sailors in shorts and sneakers enthusiastically chasing a ball. And on Sundays, one of the British ships held church services. The German ship organized film screenings, while the Bulgarian one hosted accordion dances. The ships were docked so long that their hulls accumulated a thick layer of yellow dust from the desert. Because of this, they were dubbed the Yellow Fleet. Over 8 years, the crews changed numerous times. Sailors left for home in small boats, and replacements arrived. Yet, the spirit of unity remained. It was a place where the Cold War ended on its own. There were no enemies, only neighbors by the lake. Only in 1975 did the canal finally get cleared and opened. Out of 14 vessels, only 2 were able to depart under their own power. The rest had to be towed. The mechanism simply couldn't withstand being idle for so long. When the German ship Münsterland finally entered the port of Hamburg, it was greeted by 30,000 people, like heroes, like astronauts returning from another planet. This is a story about how, even in complete isolation, in a deadlock, a person remains a person. We know how to make friends, play football, and write letters, even at the edge of the world when united by a common misfortune. And sometimes, from that misfortune, emerges the strangest and kindest state in the world. Story number 10. Treasures in a Herring Wrapper. Have you ever thought that we might have never heard the Four Seasons? Seriously, the most popular classical music in the world, which plays from every appliance, in advertisements, in elevators, and at train stations, could have simply disappeared, turned to ashes, or become rabbit bedding. Now, picture this. 1926, Italy, the city of Turin. In one old monastery college called San Carlo, the roof started leaking. As usual, there was no money for repairs. The monks scraped together some resources and decided, let's sell the old junk from the basement. There are some dusty scores lying around. Maybe a collector will offer a few lire for them. They called in an expert, Professor Alberto Gentili. He was a reserved individual, cherishing the serenity of libraries and the scent of aged paper. The professor arrived, descended into the basement, sneezed from the dust, and opened the first drawer. At that moment, his heart likely skipped a beat. Instead of dull church psalms or forgotten accounts, he discovered manuscripts, hundreds, thousands of pages. Each was penned in a singular handwriting, swift, anxious, almost soaring. On the cover was inscribed the name Antonio Vivaldi. You might say, so what? He is the great Vivaldi. But hold on a minute. At that time, in the early 20th century, Vivaldi was a nobody, a neglected ghost from the 15th century. Only a few specialists remembered his name, and even they regarded him as a second-rate composer known for writing tedious exercises for the violin. After his death, Vivaldi's music fell out of favor faster than last year's hat style. It remained unplayed for nearly 2 centuries. Gentili began to dig deeper. He found 14 volumes, and then another 13. It resembled the explosion of a supernova. There were operas, sonatas, and the famed Four Seasons. But do you know what was the most alarming? These brilliant scores had miraculously avoided destruction. It turned out that part of the collection once belonged to a count, whose heir simply didn't know what to do with them. The sheets had been used as wrapping paper. Frankly, I feel nauseous imagining a priceless 16th century manuscript being used to wrap fatty herring or a piece of cheese. Professor Gentili realized that this treasure needed to be saved, but there was a problem. The monks wanted money immediately, while the state was in no hurry to assist. Gentili had to become a true detective and adventurer. He found a wealthy patron who purchased the sheets in honor of his deceased son. But that wasn't the end of the story. It turned out that the discovered collection was only half of it. The other half was with a different heir of the same count. Gentili had to go door to door, persuade, flatter, and seek funds. It was a real ghost hunt. Only after 5 years, in 1930, was the entire Vivaldi collection gathered at the National Library of Turin. The world gasped. When these notes were performed on stage for the first time, people could hardly believe their ears. It was vibrant, fresh, audacious, as if the music had been composed only yesterday, not 2 centuries ago. Thus, a determined professor from Turin returned a whole universe of sounds to humanity. Without him, Vivaldi would have merely been a line in a dusty directory. This is a story about how true treasures often lie hidden beneath layers of dust in basements, and that sometimes one simply needs to take a close look at what others deem as junk. Story number 11. The Post That Wanted to Become a Comet. Have you ever wondered why we still receive letters in our mailboxes rather than catching them with a net in the sky? Admittedly, that would make quite an impression, and frankly, there was a moment in history when everything seemed to be heading in that direction. Let's transport ourselves to 1934, cold, wind-swept Scotland. The Isle of Harris. The scenery is such that it feels like it could be the setting for a film about lost worlds. Only stones, sheep, and the gray sea. And amidst this tranquility appears a man with a wild sparkle in his eyes, Gerhard Zucker. Gerhard was a German, an engineer, and probably the greatest optimist of his time. He believed that steamships were a thing of the past. Airplanes, he thought, were too slow and expensive. Rockets, he declared, that's the future of postal delivery. We will send letters from one island to another in mere seconds. Imagine the scene. On the shore stands a peculiar iron contraption, resembling a large tin can with a tail. That's the rocket. Zucker fills its belly with letters, 1,200 letters, each adorned with a special rocket mail stamp. Local villagers gather around, cloaked in capes, watching with suspicion, yet their curiosity outweighs their fear. Zucker is bustling about, checking the fuse. He is confident in success. The neighboring island is just a few miles away across the water. The rocket should soar into the sky, tracing a fiery arc before gracefully landing on the other side. Simply brilliant. Beautiful. And then comes the moment of truth. Zucker brings the flame closer. There's hissing, a thunderous roar, a massive cloud of smoke engulfing both the engineer and the onlookers for a brief moment. But instead of shooting off towards the stars, the rocket simply explodes right at the launch. Boom. Silence. And then, snow starts falling from the sky. But this is not ordinary snow. It's those very 1,200 letters. Charred, smelling of gunpowder, they slowly drift down in the wind, settling onto the sand and into the chilly waves of the Atlantic. Sheep, puzzled, munch on the remnants of the envelopes. Zucker stood covered in soot, gazing at this paper madness. A failure? It would seem so. A complete disaster. The British Postal Service declared that they would never again allow this crazy spectacle near official letters. But do you know what's most astonishing? The letters that were managed to be gathered from the sand are now worth a fortune. Collectors and philatelists hunt for these singed envelopes marked with Zucker's rocket mail. They symbolize an era when people were bold enough to try to harness fire, just for a postcard to an ant. Zucker did not give up. He attempted to launch rockets in other countries, but the outcome was consistently similar. A lot of noise, a lot of smoke, and very few letters delivered. Yet his dream was not in vain. It was these crazy experiments that ultimately led us to the point where rockets today deliver cargo to orbital stations. Sometimes, in order for something to truly take off, it first needs to make a few spectacular explosions at the launch. Story number 12. A green heart encased in glass. Picture this. You pour yourself a glass of water, drink it all, and that's it. No drops left. Neither next week, nor next year, nor in 50 years. It sounds like a death sentence for any living being, doesn't it? We are used to life being a constant cycle of consumption. We need to breathe, drink, and eat every minute, every hour. But nature has a way of surprising us, leaving scientists scratching their heads. Let's journey to England. The year is 1960, Easter Sunday. A regular guy named David Latimer decided to conduct a small experiment. You know, a kitchen science project born out of boredom. He took a large glass bottle, similar to ones once used for transporting chemicals or wine. In the container holding 10 gallons, bulbous, transparent, and smelling of dust, David poured a little soil onto the bottom. With the help of some wire, he gently lowered a sprout of a tradescantia, a tiny, vulnerable bundle of green life inside. He splashed just a cup of water in there, and that was it. Well, hold on, not quite everything. He sealed the bottle with a cork. Years turned into decades. The Beatles conquered the world and then disbanded. A human walked on the moon. Computers, the internet, and mobile phones made their entrance. Yet the bottle remained, resembling a shelf in the Latimer household's entryway. David only opened it once in 1972, merely to add a few drops of water. Just a tiny bit, then resealed it tightly. Since then, no fresh air, no watering. Silence, glass, and life. You may wonder, how is this possible? Well, picture our planet Earth. We too live in a sort of airtight vessel, flying through space. Inside David's bottle, a unique microcosm formed, a genuine miniature ecosystem. The plant breathes, emitting oxygen. Old leaves die, fall to the bottom, and decompose into humus, releasing carbon dioxide necessary for the growth of new shoots. Moisture evaporates, condenses on the cool glass walls, and trickles back into the soil. An endless cycle. Today, this tradescantia has lived for over 60 years. It has filled the entire space of the bottle. It looks incredible, lush, vibrant green, thriving with life. It doesn't require a gardener or fertilizers. All it needs is one thing: sunlight. It simply sits by the window, catching photons and converting them into energy. David Latimer is now an elderly man. Occasionally, he dusts off his bottle and smiles. His experiment has shown that life is remarkably resilient. It can find balance even in the tightest of spaces. This glass orb seems like a message to all of us, a message that the world is far more complex and wise than we believe. It doesn't always need our interference. Sometimes, it's enough just to not disturb. You know, when you look at this green world through the glass, it brings a sense of tranquility to the soul, as if you've glimpsed into eternity. Story number 13. The Stone Strings of a Forgotten Empire. Have you ever wondered if stones can sing? Not just produce a rumble in the wind, but resonate like a genuine musical instrument? Clearly, cleanly, and in tune. Honestly, when I first heard about this, I thought it was merely a pretty legend to attract tourists. However, reality turned out to be much stranger and more melodic. Let's travel to India in the 15th century. The Vijayanagara Empire. Imagine a plateau dotted with gigantic boulders, among which lies a city that would astound even modern architects. Hampi. There stands the Vithala Temple, dedicated to Lord Vishnu. But this temple is not just a building. It's a massive musical instrument made of granite. In the center of the temple, there are 56 columns, but they aren't ordinary supports for the roof. Each is surrounded by slender, intricately carved pillars. In total, there are 7 around each main column. And here begins the magic. If you gently tap such a pillar with your fingertips or a wooden stick, it will respond. One produces a sound like a flute, another like a drum. The third emits a pure note from the classic Indian scale of do-re-mi. Well, it aligns with their scale of sa-re-ga-ma-pa. Amazing, isn't it? Imagine, hundreds of years ago, real concerts took place beneath these arches. Musicians did not bring instruments with them. The temple itself was the instrument. Sounds resonated, bounced off the walls, and filled the space with celestial harmony. Silence, a strike, and the stone comes to life. However, the most intriguing events occurred much later. In the 19th century, when India was under British rule, the English were, of course, fascinated by this phenomenon. They were pragmatic individuals who did not believe in the magic of ancient builders. "This is impossible," they would say. "Surely, within these columns, some metal rods or cavities with bells were hidden." Their curiosity was so piqued that they decided to conduct an experiment. Well, hold on. It wasn't exactly an experiment, but more like an act of vandalism driven by pure curiosity. British engineers chose 2 columns and simply sawed them in half. They wanted to peer inside the stone violin. And do you know what they found? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Inside, the columns turned out to be solid blocks of hard granite. No cavities, no hidden mechanisms, just stone. The English stood there, scratching their heads, staring at the remnants. They could never explain how ancient masters managed to select stone pieces of such density and shape to resonate at specific frequencies. Those 2 sawn columns still stand there today as a testament to human curiosity and the limitations of science when confronted with ancient artistry. Even today, scientists debate whether it's due to the unique composition of the granite, rich in metals, or the incredibly precise cutting that is difficult to replicate even with lasers. When you stand there in the shade of these columns, it feels as if the stones keep the memory of the songs that resonated here 500 years ago. This reminds us that architecture is not just about walls and roofs. It's about a harmony that can be felt with one's hands. Story number 14. The bridge that decided to hide from everyone. Have you ever wondered why all bridges are so assertive? Seriously, they always strive to be the highest. They proudly arch over the water, shine with steel cables, and proclaim their grandeur. Massive structures visible from miles away. But what if I told you there is a bridge in a quiet corner of Europe that doesn't need any attention from others? It is so modest that it prefers to remain unseen. Picture the Netherlands. Not far from the town of Halsteren stands an ancient fort called Rovery. It was built back in the 15th century. At that time, people were very concerned about their safety and dug a deep moat around it, filling it with water. The idea was simple. Water is a barrier. It should protect, not invite. But centuries passed. In 2011, the authorities decided to transform this area into a park for strolls. And here arose a dilemma: how to allow people to enter the fort without compromising its historic appearance. Constructing a conventional tall bridge would destroy the ambiance of the ancient fortress. It would appear as a modern patch on an antique garment. You know what I mean. Then the architects conceived something brilliant, and, to be honest, a bit crazy. They decided to build a bridge that does not soar over the water. They created a bridge that passes through the water. Imagine walking along a path, approaching the canal, and instead of ascending, you begin to descend. The steps take you directly into the water, yet you do not sink. You walk through a narrow corridor with walls barely rising above the mirror-like surface. Water is on the left, water is on the right. It is mere centimeters from your elbows. You could reach out and touch the cold current, yet inside the corridor, it is dry and cozy. It is aptly named the Moses Bridge in honor of that biblical hero before whom the waves parted. From a distance, this bridge is nearly invisible. It appears as though people are walking waist-deep in the water, as if on some secret pilgrimage. From the shore, you see only a narrow slit in the water, which vanishes if you step back a couple of paces. You might wonder, what about the wood? Won't it rot in a couple of months? Well, not at all. Hold on, high science is at play here. The wood used for this bridge is a special type of pine that has been treated with a clever, eco-friendly solution, making it as hard as stone and entirely impervious to moisture. The architects swear that this underwater passage will last at least 50 years without a hint of mold. But what happens when it rains, or when the water level in the canal rises? Well, everything has been meticulously planned. Special pumps have been installed on both sides of the moat. As soon as the water starts getting bold and attempts to spill over the edge of the bridge, they activate and pump out the excess. Ingenious engineering, hidden from view. Walking on such a bridge is an unparalleled experience. It feels as if you are in two worlds at once. You are underwater, yet you are dry. You are facing an obstacle, yet you are overcoming it. There is silence, there is serenity, and it is an absolute triumph of human imagination over conventional rules. Sometimes, to achieve true greatness, you do not need to reach upwards. Sometimes, it is enough to simply let the water part. Story number 15. A forest that will transform into words after a century. Imagine planting a tree, a regular small fir tree. You know it will grow for a long time, a very long time. You water it, watch it stretch towards the sun, and realize one peculiar truth: you will never see it fully grown. But what if this tree is not just a part of the forest? What if it is a page of a future book, one that will be read by people who have not even been born yet? Listen, this is the story of the most patient project in human history, of a library of the future. Let's travel to Norway in 2014. The Nordmarka forest, close to Oslo. The air here smells of pine, wet moss, and silence. Here is where Scottish artist Katie Patterson chose to challenge our tendency to seek instant gratification, which is so prevalent in our modern lives. With just a push of a button, we expect immediate results. Katie found this notion to be rather dull. In a forest, she planted 1,000 spruce saplings with the intention that these trees would remain undisturbed for 100 years. They will simply grow, absorb rainwater, sway under the snow, and listen to the birds. Only in 2014 will they be cut down. The wood will then be transformed into paper, authentic forest-scented paper. But what is it for? This is where it gets fascinating. Starting from 2014, a special committee selects one writer each year, someone deserving. They are invited to write any book they choose, a novel, a collection of poems, or a philosophical essay. However, there is one strict condition. No one is allowed to read the text, not the publisher, nor the author's family, nor even the committee itself. The author travels to this Norwegian forest, conducts a small ceremony, and hands over the manuscript in a sealed format. The first to participate was the renowned writer Margaret Atwood. She submitted her text and remarked that it felt like sending a message in a bottle through the ocean of time. To be quite honest, I think this takes an incredible amount of creator. Writing something grand and knowing that during your lifetime, no one will affirm you with a bravo or declare it a failure. All of these manuscripts are stored in a new library in Oslo, which boasts a special room specifically designed for this purpose. It is called the Room of Silence. The walls are crafted from layers of wood taken from that very forest when space was cleared for the new saplings. The ambiance is softly lit, cozy, and exceptionally quiet. Embedded within the walls are glass boxes containing the manuscripts. Each has the author's name and the year, but they are locked away. The keys to these boxes will only be given to readers 100 years after the project commenced, in 2014. Imagine that moment. Distant descendants will arrive in the forest, cut down the grown spruces, print the books, and finally discover what we wanted to convey to them. This is an act of absolute trust. We believe that in a century, forests will still exist, that people will continue to read paper books, and that the city of Oslo will remain. But wait, we don't just believe. We're giving them a reason to preserve it all. This project isn't merely about literature. It is about hope, reflecting the notion that life continues beyond our small present. Story number 16. The Loneliest Singer in the Abyss. Imagine absolute silence. Deep underwater, where sunlight fades and dissolves into darkness, sound is everything. It encompasses vision, touch, and life itself. In this blue abyss, creatures communicate over vast distances, sending their songs across hundreds of kilometers of ocean. Typically, they receive replies. Yet, honestly, in this story, things did not unfold that way. The year was 1989. The Cold War had not yet ended, but it was beginning to wane. At that time, the United States Navy was attentively listening to the ocean. They had set up an intricate network of hydrophones to capture the sounds of Soviet submarines. Instead of the clanking of metal and the hum of motors, they picked up a strange sound, rhythmic, deep, and resembling the voice of a living being, albeit entirely unusual. Listen, it was a whale, but a whale that sang at a frequency of 52 hertz. For us, 52 hertz is a low, rumbling sound, but in the world of whales, it's incredibly high. Blue whales typically vocalize between 10 and 20 hertz, while fin whales sing around 20. These are low, powerful vibrations that travel across the ocean. But this guy, he was singing in a completely different range. A scientist named Bill Watkins began tracking this unusual signal. He listened to it year after year, from 1990 to 2000, decade after decade. He simply referred to it as 52. Just imagine his life. He swims through the Pacific Ocean from the coasts of California to the Aleutian Islands. He sings his song, searching for kin. He calls out, "I'm here. Where are you?" But no one hears him. Not because his voice is quiet. No, it is powerful, like that of the largest blue whale. He goes unheard because other whales are not tuned into that frequency. It's as if he speaks a language that no one else understands anymore. To the rest of the ocean, he is a ghost, an unseen giant wandering alone for years. He swims past pods of other whales. He might be just a few kilometers away, yet they remain blind and deaf to his call. He is the loneliest inhabitant on the planet. He has no family, no friends. All he possesses is his voice and the endless expanse of blue water. You might wonder why he is like this, but scientists still debate this. Some think he is a rare hybrid of two different whale species. Others believe that it is a congenital anomaly, making him unique, while some hold that he is the last representative of an ancient species yet to be discovered. But do you know what is the most remarkable part of this story? Despite years of utter solitude, he has not fallen silent. Bill Watkins tracked him until his death in 2004. The whale continued to sing. He didn't give up. He kept going. His voice has dropped slightly in pitch with age, much like humans, yet he still persistently sends his 52 hertz into the darkness. Many people who learned about this story began to see this whale as a symbol of hope. After all, we too sometimes feel that we speak a language that no one understands. We feel alone in our own ocean. But this whale just keeps swimming. He continues to sing. And by the way, in recent years, there have been news stories that make the heart race. Recently, other groups of researchers recorded a similar signal at the opposite end of the ocean, 52 hertz. Could it be that there are now two of them? We don't know for sure, but the very thought that somewhere in the abyss, two lonely voices might finally meet makes this world a bit cozier. Sometimes, you just need to keep singing your song, even when it seems no one is listening. Who knows, maybe right now someone else is tuning into your frequency. Story number 17. The Underground Eden of a Sicilian Immigrant. Listen, have you ever felt like everything is against you? I mean, literally everything. The weather, the ground beneath your feet, the circumstances. Most of us in such a situation simply throw up our hands, let out a sigh, and go off in search of another place in the sun. However, the hero of this tale decided that if the sun was too harsh, he would simply hide from it, but do so beautifully. Let's transport ourselves to California, the city of Fresno, the early 20th century, 1901. Picture this location, a sun-scorched plain, dust everywhere. The heat is so intense that it feels as if you could slice the air with a knife. Into this welcoming place arrives Baldassare Forestieri, a young Sicilian who had dreamt of growing citrus his whole life. He invested all his savings in a plot of land, 70 acres. He envisioned thick lemon groves, shade, and the scent of blossoms. But when Baldassare took a shovel and attempted to dig, a sharp clang of metal struck stone. Beneath the thin layer of dust lay hardpan, a cemented layer of clay and sand, solid as concrete. Nothing grew on it, and it was impossible to plow. Honestly, it was a disaster. His family wrote to him from Sicily, "Come back, kid. You've bought a piece of desert." But Baldassare was not an ordinary man. He was stubborn. extremely stubborn. To escape the sweltering 40-degree heat, he dug a small hole, covered it with boards, and spent the night there. And lo and behold, it was cool, quiet, and somehow peaceful underground. Then a crazy idea struck him. If trees couldn't grow above, they would grow below. He grabbed a pickaxe, shovel, and pry bar. He had no plans, no architectural training, and not even any helpers, just 2 hands and one dream. He began to dig. Day after day, year after year, for 40 years. Imagine it, 40 years of his life spent underground, burrowing into the rocky crust. No, wait, he wasn't just digging a hole. He was constructing an underground castle. By the mid-20s, a whole labyrinth sprawled beneath his property. There were bedrooms, a kitchen, a library, a living room with a fireplace, but the most astounding feature was the courtyards. Baldassare excavated vast, roofless rooms that looked from above like ordinary holes in the ground. He brought fertile soil to the bottom of those courtyards and planted trees, lemons, oranges, grapefruits. They grew within the earth, their tops reached for the light, but never broke the surface. Baldassare created a unique microclimate. It was warm in winter and cool in summer. He even cultivated a tree variety that bore 7 different types of citrus simultaneously, just out of curiosity. When neighbors peeked in, they couldn't believe their eyes. Above, a lifeless desert. Below, a true Eden. Vines hung from the ceilings, cool corridors paved with river stones, and the aroma of citrus groves wafting through the underground halls. Baldassare Forestieri passed away in 1946, leaving behind more than 10 acres of underground gardens. He was never wealthy and didn't construct a skyscraper, but he proved that if you dislike reality, you can dig out your own little universe where it's always cool and the scent of lemons fills the air. This story demonstrates that obstacles are merely an invitation to change your perspective. Sometimes, to appreciate a garden, one must not gaze at the sky, but rather look beneath their feet. Story number 18. A ship in the sands and a river that changed its mind. Have you ever misplaced something truly significant? Perhaps your car keys or an umbrella on a bus. It's frustrating, isn't it? Now, imagine the people who one day awakened to discover they had lost a river. A vast, mighty river that was their sole source of life. Let us travel back to the 19th century. The United States, Nebraska, in the year 1865. During this time, the Missouri River served as the primary highway for settlers. Enormous paddle boats traversed its waters, transporting gold, furs, supplies, and people in search of fortunes in the Wild West. And on this very river sailed a magnificent steamboat named Bertrand. It carried 250 tons of cargo and dozens of passengers. In its hold lay everything necessary for living in the new towns, from boxes of mercury for gold mining to bottles of sparkling champagne and ladies' shoes of the latest Parisian fashion. However, the Missouri was a treacherous river. Its course changed more frequently than a temperamental beauty changes outfits. Hidden beneath the surface were submerged logs and sandbars that had once lain elsewhere. The Bertrand encountered one of these hidden dangers. Its hull cracked and water rushed in. Fortunately, all passengers were rescued. The ship gradually sank to the riverbed, with its masts still protruding from the water for a time. Then the truly astonishing happened. The river simply vanished. Over several decades, the Missouri, following some internal rhythm of its own, shifted its course a good mile away, leaving the site of the sunken Bertrand buried beneath layers of silt, sand, and dirt. Grass grew above, followed by shrubs, and eventually, entire fields of corn emerged. The ship found itself buried under 10 meters of soil deep within a farmer's field. A century passed. The Bertrand turned into a legend, an old tale in which only local treasure hunters believed. But in 1968, 2 enthusiasts, Sam Corbin and Jesse Purcell, decided that this legend was worth investigating. They utilized 19th century maps and modern metal detectors, and guess what? They located it right in the middle of a cornfield, far from any hint of water. When excavations began, archaeologists gasped. It turned out that the layers of dirt and complete absence of oxygen provided ideal preservation conditions. It was a true time capsule. Imagine, as they opened the hold, finding crates of canned goods that looked as though they were packed only yesterday. Bottles of wine, tools, clothing, even pocket watches that appeared ready to be wound and started. It was the most comprehensive and incredible collection of Civil War-era artifacts in the United States. They discovered 3,000 pairs of shoes, crates of pickled cucumbers that were still green, and even mercury that continued to gleefully roll in its steel containers. Today, at this site, a museum stands within DeSoto National Wildlife Refuge. You enter it and see the massive remains of a ship standing in the desert, hundreds of meters from the nearest water source. This spectacle makes one ponder the ever-changing nature of our planet. What appears steadfast today, a shore, a river, a road, might tomorrow be buried beneath layers of time. However, it's not solely about time. It's about the traces we leave behind. Occasionally, nature tenderly preserves these remnants for us, allowing us to glimpse into our past selves after a century has passed. Story number 19. The chocolate bar that overheard the future. Have you ever considered how often remarkable discoveries stem from sheer carelessness or hunger? To be honest, I intended to share a tale about a great con artist and the Eiffel Tower, as I previously promised. Yet, upon reviewing my archives, I found that this story was already documented there twice. It seems this fellow managed to fool even me. So, let's switch gears and discuss something sweeter, but no less explosive. Visualize the year 1945. A laboratory in Massachusetts belonging to a company named Raytheon. The air is infused with the aroma of ozone, machine oil, and seriousness. Massive humming cabinets wired with circuits occupy the space. These are magnetrons, the heart of radars that help secure victories in wars. Among this scientific marvel wanders Percy Spencer, a self-taught individual, a man who never completed even elementary school, yet possessed more knowledge about electricity than any academic. He was a hands-on practitioner, eager for things to operate smoothly. On that day, Percy stood near a functioning magnetron, just an ordinary work moment. The device buzzed, bulbs glowed, and electrons raced wildly in a vacuum. Suddenly, he felt something odd in his trouser pocket. You know that uncomfortable sensation when something begins to warm slowly before turning into a sticky puddle? "Oh," he muttered, reaching into his pocket. There it was, a chocolate bar, a standard peanut candy bar that, within seconds, had morphed into a hot, gooey mass. Wait, it was cool in the room. Percy wasn't near an oven. He was merely beside the radar. Any other person in his position would have cursed and gone to clean their trousers. But Percy was different. He froze, savoring the silence, the hum of the device and chocolate coating his fingers. He realized that the invisible waves had achieved what would normally take 10 minutes in an oven. They had struck right at the sugar and cocoa molecules. Percy decided to test his theory, but not on chocolate. He sent an assistant for a bag of popcorn kernels. Imagine this scene: serious scientists in white coats scattering corn on a table before a secret military device. A switch clicked. 1, 2 seconds passed, and suddenly, boom! The lab filled with the sounds of tiny explosions. Fluffy white popcorn began to soar around the room, hitting the ceiling and blanketing intricate blueprints. It was a triumph, a small culinary chaos amid high technology. The next day, Percy brought a raw egg into the lab. He made a small hole in it and placed it directly in front of the magnetron's horn. One of his colleagues leaned in closer to see what would happen, and bam! The egg exploded right in his face. Yolk on glasses, egg white on a tie. Science, as they say, demands sacrifices. Thus, from one melted chocolate and a ruined suit, the first microwave oven in the world was born. This initial model was called Radar Age. It stood as tall as a person and weighed 340 kilograms. It cost $5,000, a considerable sum for those times. It was typically purchased only by restaurants and military ships. However, Percy Spencer did not seek fame. He simply desired for food to cook more quickly. This story reminds us that sometimes we just need to pay attention to what's in our pocket. Great things often disguise themselves as ordinary sticky messes. The key is not to rush to throw away the spoiled chocolate. Story number 20. The city that hid in a single entrance. Have you ever dreamt of going to work, the store, and the movies without putting on a coat and boots? Even if the outside weather is frigid and the wind is tearing off roofs? Honestly, for most of us, this sounds like a fantastical tale of colonizers on Mars. But on our planet, there exists a place where this is the usual daily life. No fantasy, just mountains, snow, and one very large building. Picture Alaska, a small bay named Prince William Sound. This place is called Whittier. Getting here is already quite an adventure. You have only two options, either by sea or through a single 4-kilometer-long tunnel. And this tunnel is one way. For 6 months, it operates in one direction. I'm joking, of course. Every 30 minutes, the direction of travel changes, and at night, it is completely locked up. Silence, cold, the whistling wind. In this peculiar isolated place, around 200 people reside. And do you know what the most astonishing part is? They almost never go outside. Not because they are afraid or lazy. They simply do not need to. The entire city of Whittier fits within a single structure. It is called the Begich Tower. 14 stories of gray concrete. This was once a military barracks built in 1957. But when the military left, the building did not become vacant. It transformed into a vertical city. Just imagine waking up in your apartment on the 10th floor, brushing your teeth, drinking coffee, and then taking the elevator down to the 2nd floor. That's where the post office is located. Need to buy milk? A few more floors down and you're in a full grocery store. Got a sore throat? There's a small clinic operating within the same building. Feeling like praying? There's a cozy church in the basement. Everything you need is here. A police station, a laundromat, a town hall, and even a small hotel for those rare tourists who dared to drive through the tunnel. And what about the children? Here lies the most interesting part. The school is in a neighboring building, but to spare the students from battling snowdrifts that can reach above human height, a warm underground tunnel has been dug between the house and the school. Kids attend classes in their home slippers and t-shirts. But wait, don't think of this as some kind of voluntary prison. The residents of Whittier deeply love their home. The Begich Towers foster an atmosphere of one big, sometimes excessively noisy family. If someone runs out of sugar, there's no need to make a call. You simply step into the hallway and knock on your neighbor's door. Everyone knows one another here. You cannot walk by your neighbor without exchanging greetings. "Hey John, you forgot to turn off the TV again yesterday," you might hear in the elevator. This is life under a microscope, yet it also embodies absolute safety. In a town where a storm can rage outside, with wind speeds reaching 120 kilometers per hour, the walls of an old barracks feel like the most secure place in the world. From a distance, against the backdrop of majestic mountains and glaciers, the building may appear small and vulnerable, but within its walls beats the heart of the town. This story illustrates how people can adapt to the harshest of conditions, transforming cold isolation into warm neighborhood connections. Sometimes, to feel part of something greater, one doesn't need to construct massive metropolises. A reliable elevator and neighbors willing to share sugar are often more than enough. Story number 21. The Boy Who Read the Jungle by the Stars. Have you ever noticed how adults sometimes complicate things? We build enormous telescopes, write dissertations, and debate at conferences, yet sometimes we overlook what is right in front of us or hanging just above our heads. Frankly, this story is my personal favorite because it proves that curiosity and Google Maps can be more powerful than decades of academic expeditions. Let's travel to Canada, Quebec province, in 2012. Picture the typical room of a teenager. On the desk lie textbooks, empty mugs, and a laptop. Seated at that desk is William Godory, who is merely 15 years old. William was enthralled by the culture of the Maya. He was plagued by one question that even the most esteemed scholars struggle to answer. Why did the Maya build their cities in such unusual locations? Typically, people settle near rivers, fertile plains, or by the sea. Yet the Maya constructed their massive stone metropolises deep within impenetrable jungles on arid highlands far from water. This is illogical, William pondered, staring at a map of Yucatan. Then, a wild idea struck him. What if they weren't looking at the land, but rather up at the sky? No, wait, not just looking. William hypothesized that the Maya designed their cities to exactly mirror the maps of the constellations. He discovered an ancient Maya codex which described 22 of their constellations. He overlaid the map of these constellations onto the map of Mexico and Guatemala. That's where the magic began. It turned out that the brightest stars precisely aligned with the locations of the largest cities. 117 points matched perfectly. It was beautiful, but William wanted more. He identified a 23rd constellation. It contained 3 stars, but on the map of the Earth, only 2 cities matched with the 2 stars. The third point was missing. Where a bright star of this constellation should have been, there was merely a green void, the untouched jungles of Campeche State. William didn't hesitate to appear foolish. He reached out to the Canadian Space Agency. Imagine the serious faces of engineers when a 15-year-old student approached them with a request. Please, give me satellite images of this specific area in the jungle. I think there's a hidden city there. And guess what? They helped him. It seems astronauts and scientists also enjoy a good mystery. They provided high-resolution images from NASA and the Japanese Space Agency. William began to analyze the photographs. Pixel by pixel, greenery, more greenery, shadows from trees, and suddenly a distinct geometric shape emerged, a square. Beneath layers of ancient trees lay something that nature could not have created. It was a pyramid, approximately 30 meters tall, along with around 30 buildings surrounding it. William named this lost city Kakchi, which translates to fire mouth. It turned out to be one of the 5 largest cities ever built by the Maya. It had been concealed from humanity for thousands of years until a matchmaker in Canada decided to connect the stars with lines. Although some archaeologists still debate the specifics, the global scientific community was left in awe. This 15-year-old made a discovery using just logic and open data. This story highlights that the limits of knowledge only exist in our minds. Sometimes, finding treasures on Earth requires simply looking more closely at the sky. Story number 22. The runner who lingered for half a century over tea. Listen, have you ever felt so awkward that you just wished you could disappear? You know, literally sink into the ground, so that no one would ask any unnecessary questions? We have all found ourselves in such situations, having said something silly on a date or mistaking a door. But the hero of our story today took the art of awkward exits to an entirely different level. He didn't just leave, he vanished from official records for a remarkable 54 years. Let's transport ourselves to Sweden. Stockholm, 1912. The 5th Summer Olympic Games. Imagine that day, the 14th of July. The heat was unbearable, 32 degrees in the shade. For northern Sweden, this was pure hell. At the marathon starting line stood athletes, among them a young Japanese runner, Shizo Kanekuri. He was his country's hope. Shizo had traveled to Stockholm over 18 days, first by ship, then across Russia on the Trans-Siberian Railway. Imagine, nearly 3 weeks on a train, trying to train in the narrow aisles of the cars, arrived exhausted yet determined. The starter pistol fired. The runners surged forward. But the weather was merciless. Athletes fell one by one. Almost half of the participants dropped out due to heat stroke. At the 30th kilometer, Shizo Kanekuri felt the world around him starting to blur. His legs felt like lead. His head throbbed. He realized that just a few more steps and he would collapse onto the scorching asphalt. Then he spotted a garden, a cozy little garden by a small country house. A Swedish family sat there peacefully sipping cold lemonade. Barely able to move his legs, Shizo turned towards them. The hosts, seeing a half-conscious Olympian in white attire, gasped. They seated him in a chair, offered him water, fed him, and displayed the utmost Swedish hospitality. Sid was filled with gratitude and yet utterly crushed by his defeat that he simply fell asleep. He rested for several hours. Upon waking, He noticed that the sun was already setting. The marathon had long since concluded. The winners had received their awards, and he was still being searched for. The Swedish police had been tirelessly scouring the area. Kanakuri felt so ashamed that he could think of nothing better than to quietly slip away, make his way to the port, and take the first ship back to Japan. He did not utter a word to the officials. Silence. A pause. A discreet departure, though infused with a Japanese flavor. In Sweden, Shizo Kanakuri was officially declared missing. His name lingered on the list of the sought-after for decades. People concocted wild theories. Perhaps he got lost in the woods, or was he abducted? Meanwhile, Shizo lived peacefully in Japan, worked as a geography teacher, and even continued to run marathons back home. 50 years went by. In 1967, Swedish journalists stumbled upon the surprising news that the missing marathon runner was alive, well, and taking care of grandchildren in Kumamoto Prefecture. Swedish television immediately reached out to him with an offer that was hard to refuse. "Sid, would you like to finish your race?" At the age of 75, Kanakuri returned to Stockholm, to the very stadium. He laced up his sneakers once again and, to the applause of thousands, crossed the finish line. His final time totaled 54 years, 8 months, 6 days, 5 hours, 32 minutes, and 20 seconds. The longest marathon in human history. "It was a long journey," smiled the old man as he finished. "But during that time, I managed to get married, raise 6 children, and see 10 grandchildren. It was worth it." However, wait, this story isn't about slow running. It's a tale reminding us that it's never too late to finish. Even if your tea break extends over half a century, a sense of duty and dignity transcends time. This heartwarming and somewhat humorous story reminds us that our mistakes are not the end of the road. They are merely a long pause before the triumphant conclusion. Story number 23. The Iron Dragon and the Castle Built by One Man. Listen, I promised you a story about a man who built a cathedral. But when I delved into my deepest archives, I realized that the cathedrals typically discussed pale in comparison to this place. This is not just a structure. It's a stone-carved scream of individuality. Honestly, when you hear this, you will understand that one person with a shovel and determination is a formidable force, much stronger than any construction company. Let's transport ourselves to the mountains of Colorado, the late 60s, 1969 to be precise. Picture a guy named Jim Beep. He is 25 years old. He has just purchased a small piece of land in the woods for $450. All he wanted was to build a cozy family cottage for himself and his wife, a little family nest. Jim began collecting stones, ordinary river stones that lay right at his feet. He piled them up, smeared some cement, and the wall began to rise. And then his father, looking at all this, jokingly remarked, "Listen, Jim, this looks more like a castle than a house." And you know what? These words ignited a spark. Jim seemed to have an epiphany. He thought, a castle? Why not? And instead of constructing a cottage, he began building a fortress. 75 years passed. Just imagine the scale of this madness. Jim Bishop was creating this colossal castle all by himself, without cranes, without blueprints, lacking any architectural training, without hired help, without anyone at all. Just his hands, his back, and a belief that he was doing something remarkable. He personally carried the stones, crafted metal structures. Today, Bishop's castle soars to a height of 16 stories. It features grand towers with spires that sway in the wind. Jim claims this is intentional for flexibility. There are iron walkways suspended over chasms. But the most outrageous element is the dragon's head. Jim found an old stainless steel tank at a dump. He cut it, bent it, and welded it to one of the towers, forming a massive dragon's head. And this isn't merely a decorative piece. He connected it to the chimney, so when the castle's furnace is lit, the dragon breathes real fire and smoke. In the Colorado mountains stands a fiery stone castle. Isn't it a marvel? Jim has been working on it for over 50 years. Every single day, he asserts that the castle is his way of telling the world, no to rules, no to boredom, no to fear. He refers to it as a monument to freedom. When you stand at the base of this colossal structure, it feels unsettling. It appears alive. It's imperfect, crooked, wild, but it possesses more soul than all modern skyscrapers combined. This is a tale of how one individual can alter the landscape of an entire mountain just by refusing to stop. Jim is still there. If you visit, you'll spot him in work clothes, with a face covered in dust from the stones. He is still hauling rocks. He is still building. Sometimes, to leave a mark in history, you don't need millions. You just need to start stacking stones one on top of another, and ignore those who say a cottage is the most you can achieve. Story number 24. The room where you become the loudest sound in the universe. Have you ever pondered what absolute silence sounds like? I mean, silence so profound that not a single sound disrupts it. No hum of cars outside, no chirping of birds, not even the rustle of your own breath. We are accustomed to noise. It envelops us. We live within it from the moment we are born until our last breath. Yet there is a place on our planet where this cocoon shatters, leaving you alone with something incredibly strange. Let's transfer to the city of Minneapolis, to the Orfield Laboratories. Here lies the anechoic chamber, officially recognized by the Guinness World Records as the quietest place on Earth. Picture a room with walls that are 1 meter thick, built of concrete and steel, and inside, lined with enormous fiberglass pyramids. They absorb 99.99% of all sound. It's not just quiet, it's void. When you enter, and the heavy doors close behind you, something eerie occurs. Your ear, accustomed to picking up external signals, suddenly realizes there are no signals, just a vacuum. And that's when your brain starts doing what it does best. He starts cranking the volume to its maximum. Now, you might think, there is silence and stillness, so what's the issue? Here lies the problem. After a few minutes in this room, you begin to hear things that you shouldn't perceive at all. You can hear your heart pounding loudly, like a drum on the spirit. You hear your lungs filling with air, and that sound resembles the rustling of massive firs. But the most astonishing part is that you start to hear the blood flowing through your veins, the workings of your intestines, and the creaking of your joints with the slightest movement. In an anechoic chamber, you become the source of noise. You are the loudest object in this room. However, hold on, this is not the toughest part yet. People lose their sense of spatial orientation in this chamber. Do you understand? We determine the position of our bodies, in part, by the echoes that bounce off walls and objects. In the Orfield room, there is no echo whatsoever. After 10 minutes, many begin to feel dizzy. After 20, hallucinations start to occur. The brain, deprived of familiar stimuli, begins to invent sounds on its own. The record for staying in this completely dark room is a mere 45 minutes. No one has lasted longer. People begin to panic. They feel as though the walls are closing in on them, even though the room is quite spacious. This is absolute isolation from the outside world, which transforms into a test of your psyche. Scientists use this room to test technology ranging from NASA's spacecraft to hearing aids. Yet, for an ordinary person, this space serves as a reminder of how closely we are intertwined with the world around us. We are creatures of sound. Without it, we start to lose ourselves. Sometimes, to genuinely hear ourselves, one needs to step into a room devoid of any sound. But be cautious. What you hear there may not be pleasant. Story number 25. A heavenly supermarket that operates on a schedule. Have you ever considered what it would be like if nature decided to engage in charity? I mean, seriously, without any conditions or fine print in a contract. We are accustomed to getting food from a store, from a garden, or at the very least, through a delivery service. However, in one corner of our planet, people have been going outside with baskets for over 100 years whenever the sky starts to rage, and this is not a metaphor. Let's transport ourselves to Honduras, the Euro department, a city nestled among green mountains and dense mists. Typically, it's like any other place, hot, the calls of parrots, the aroma of coffee. But every year, somewhere between May and June, something occurs that leaves meteorologists from all over the world helplessly throwing up their hands. Imagine, the sky suddenly darkens, becoming as gloomy as twilight. A storm begins. But not just a little rain, a full-fledged downpour, thunder, and lightning. A wall of water so thick you can't see your own outstretched hand. The townspeople hide in their homes, they shutter their windows, they wait. And then, silence. A pause. A strike. The rain stops just as suddenly as it began. People step out into the streets, and you know what they see? The entire earth, all the roads, all the fields, are covered with thousands of tiny, living, silver fish. They leap in the puddles, shimmering in the sunlight. To be honest, if I hadn't seen the photographs, I would have thought it was just an old fishing tale. However, this actually happens every single year for the past 160 years. You might ask, how did they end up there? Well, this is where the stories begin to differ. The locals have a beautiful legend. In 1850, a Spanish missionary named Father José Manuel Subirana arrived in these parts. He observed the dire conditions in which the people lived, struggling with food scarcity. He retreated to the mountains and prayed for 3 days and 3 nights, asking God to perform a miracle to feed the hungry. When he descended into the valley, the first fish rain began. Since then, Father Subirana has been regarded as a saint, and the fish are considered his gift. Yet scientists, of course, are rather tedious. They prefer their formulas. They proposed a theory involving tornadoes, suggesting that strong winds scoop fish from the Atlantic Ocean, transporting them over 200 kilometers through the mountains and dropping them neatly onto the Yoru. But wait, if that's the case, why does the tornado only pick one species of fish, and why does it occur with strict regularity in the same location? There's another quite strange hypothesis. Some researchers believe that this fish resides in underground rivers beneath the city. When heavy rain begins, the caves fill up, and the rushing waters flush the fish to the surface through small openings in the soil. But you know what's the most amusing part? The locals couldn't care less about the theories. For them, it's a celebration. The Della Levis Festival. They gather fish by the buckets, fry it up, treat their neighbors, and sing songs. This is a tale of how a miracle isn't always something inexplicable. Sometimes a miracle is simply what happens at the perfect time and makes life just a little easier. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes they drop right down on our heads, reminding us that nature is far more inventive than any storyteller. Story number 26. The tree that decided standing still was too boring. Have you ever wondered why we consider trees, well, as furniture? Naturally occurring, but still. We are accustomed to thinking that if an oak grows here, it will be here, unchanged, for 100 years, rooted in place, steadfast to its patch of earth. Honestly, this seems like the law of nature. But what if I told you that deep in the Ecuadorian jungles, some disagree quite vehemently? Picture the Amazon River basin. The 1990s. Dense, humid rainforests. The air here is so thick, it feels as if you could drink it. In the midst of this green chaos lives the Socratea exoryza palm, which the local elders call the walking palm. When you first see it, you might feel a bit uneasy. You see, it doesn't have a typical trunk going down into the ground. Instead, the tree stands on dozens of tall, sturdy roots that stick out of the ground like stilts or the legs of a giant insect. The entire trunk hangs in the air, supported by these peculiar props. But the most astonishing part isn't its appearance, it's what it does. Imagine this scenario. You find yourself in the jungle, discover this palm, stake a marker near it, and then leave. You return a year later, and guess what? The stake is in place, but the palm tree is gone. It has moved a couple of meters to the side. Nonsense, you might say. Trees don't walk. But that's not the case. Hang on a moment. Biologists have long debated this phenomenon. It turns out that the Socratea exoryza is a true strategist. In the jungle, there is an ongoing, brutal battle for sunlight. If a palm tree is shaded by a larger neighbor, it does not accept its fate. It starts to take action. The tree senses where there is more light and begins to grow new roots in that direction, where the sun is brighter. These new roots dig into the soil, becoming stronger, while the old roots, left in the shadows, slowly dry out and decay. Silence. A pause. Movement. Gradually, the entire tree relocates to new supports. It literally steps from one place to another. On average, in a year, such a palm can cover about 20 meters. This isn't a sprint, of course, but for a plant, it's a true journey around the world. Throughout its life, it can completely change its location, moving to the other side of the forest glade in search of better fortunes. You know, when scientists from a paleontological institute in Slovakia began investigating this phenomenon, they were astonished. It turned out that the palm behaves almost like an animal. It has a goal. It has a method to achieve that goal. And it possesses endless patience. Although some grumpy botanists argue that this shouldn't be called walking in the strictest sense, the locals aren't concerned. For them, the Socratea symbolizes a life that never gives up. If the conditions don't suit you, simply grow new roots and move to where it's better. Genius, right? This story illustrates that even the most fundamental rules, like a tree being rooted in its birthplace, have exceptions. Nature always finds a loophole. Sometimes, to survive, one must not be afraid to leave the old roots behind and take the first, albeit very slow, step toward the light. Story number 27. The old lady who refuses to fade away. Have you ever noticed how fragile things seem to be nowadays? Honestly, you buy a kettle and it burns out in a year. Your phone begins to lag after 2. It feels like each object comes with tiny invisible clocks that count down to its breakdown. Scientists refer to this as planned obsolescence. However, in a small town in California, there's an object that seems completely unaware of such rules. Let's travel to Livermore, station number 6. Picture a regular fire station garage, the smell of rubber, gleaming metal. And there, under the ceiling hangs it, a small, dull light bulb. It barely shines, just 4 watts. It doesn't illuminate the room, it merely burns. But do you know what's special about it? It has been burning for 124 years. It was installed in 1901. Just think, when it was first lit, carriages were still being pulled by horses. There were no airplanes, no television, no internet. The world has changed beyond recognition. Empires have fallen, skyscrapers have risen, humans have set foot on the moon, while this little glass bulb has continued to shine. It is referred to as the century-old lamp, and it truly poses a challenge to the modern consumption-driven world. It has outlasted numerous fire chief officials. It has witnessed thousands of emergency calls. It has been moved from building to building multiple times, and each time, firefighters shuddered in fear. What if the filament breaks now? When it was transported to a new location in 1976, the operation resembled a special mission. The lamp was not unscrewed from its socket, as there were concerns about damaging the threads. The wires were simply cut, and the bulb was escorted by police vehicles with sirens blaring. The entire move took 22 minutes, and throughout that time, the lamp stayed dark. The firefighters swear it was the longest 22 minutes of their lives. However, you might wonder, what is the secret? Scientists have speculated for a long time, taking samples of glass and examining the filament's composition. It turned out that it was created by engineer Adolphe Shea, a rival of the great Thomas Edison. The filament in this lamp is 8 times thicker than that of a standard bulb. It is made of carbon rather than tungsten. It operates at a very low wattage and hardly heats up. But there is another, more human version of the story. In the 1920s, light bulb manufacturers from around the globe convened in Geneva and formed a secret cartel known as Phoebus. They agreed that light bulbs should not last too long, a maximum of 1,000 hours. If a bulb lasted indefinitely, who would purchase a new one? Well, the century-old lamp from Livermore was produced before this conspiracy. It stands as a testament to a time when products were made with care and aimed to serve people rather than generate profit for corporations. Today, this light bulb has an official website, a live webcam that runs 24 hours a day in case it were to go out, and thousands of fans around the world. Each year, the residents of Livermore celebrate it with a festival. It has become a symbol of reliability, stability, and enduring engineering. You see, when you gaze at its dim orange glow, a warmth spreads through your soul. In a world where everything breaks and changes, there is something that remains constant, a small point of light that refuses to conform to the laws of economics and time. Sometimes, to become a legend, it isn't necessary to shine brightly. It's enough just not to go out for a very long time. Story number 28. A woman who broke through a mountain solely through sheer willpower. Have you ever felt trapped? Not in a room or an elevator, but in life itself, when it feels like an insurmountable wall stands between you and the rest of the world? Honestly, for the residents of the village of Mahua in China's Guizhou province, this was not a metaphor. It was their reality, mountainous, granite, and unforgiving reality. Imagine this place. The mountains here resemble giant dragon teeth that pierce through the clouds. The village lies deep within a basin. The only way out is to climb steep cliffs. To simply transport a bag of rice to the nearest market, men had to spend 5 hours up and 5 hours down. Life in isolation, silence, fog, and complete despair. In 1999, the government promised to construct a road, but the mountains proved too formidable. The budget was too tight, the project was cancelled. And then Den Inshan stepped forward. A typical woman, a mother and farmer's wife. She lacked an engineering degree, she had never handled dynamite. But she possessed something the officials didn't have. She was tired of watching her children grow up trapped. "If the mountain does not let us pass, then we will go through it," she declared. Neighbors laughed, but you understand how it is. "Den, have you lost your mind? It's just a rock. You want to dig a tunnel with a shovel?" But she didn't listen. She sold her pigs, all her wealth, to buy the first tools. Hammers, chisels, a little bit of powder. Wait, actually, she didn't even know how to blow up rock the right way. She learned on the job. She began digging alone. Imagine this scene. A small woman facing a massive gray mountain, striking the stone with a hammer. Tap, tap, tap. 1 centimeter a day. 2 centimeters. People looked at her with pity, but after a month, her husband joined her. In 3 months, a couple more neighbors came along. They worked in the dark, by the light of kerosene lamps, breathing in the dust that clogged their lungs. 13 years, listen closely, 13 years of her life this woman spent inside the mountain. There was a moment in 2001 when they nearly gave up. They had already dug about 30 meters, but hit a layer of rock so hard that their tools were breaking. At that point, Den Inshan emerged from the cave, sat down on the ground, and no, she did not cry. She went to the city, found an old retired engineer, and convinced him to become their consultant for free. Just for food, and the promise that his name would be remembered. In 2011, it happened. The final blow of the chisel, and at the end of the dark corridor, a dazzling ray of sunlight burst forth. They had dug a tunnel measuring 212 meters. It wasn't a smooth highway, but a rough, uneven hole in the rock. Yet through it, for the first time in the history of Mahua, a truck could pass. The village's life changed in a week. Electricity appeared, doctors arrived. Children could now attend school in the neighboring village, taking 15 minutes instead of 5 hours. Den Inshan became a legend. She is referred to as the modern Mulan. But she says she just wanted her grandchildren to see the world without scraping their knees on stones. This story reminds us that any mountain is merely a collection of rocks, and if you have enough stubbornness to strike at them day after day, eventually the stone will yield. The key is not to drop the hammer, even when sparks fly in your face. Story number 29. An old man who painted the gray world to save his home. Listen, have you ever felt out of place? Like the world around you was rapidly transforming, becoming glass and steel, while you remained in your small, shabby home, obstructing progress? Honestly, it's frightening. It's terrifying to realize that the place where you've spent all your life could become a pile of rubble beneath the treads of a bulldozer tomorrow. Most people in that situation simply pack up their bags and leave. But one veteran of perseverance decided that his last line of defense would not be a weapon, but an ordinary paintbrush. Let's transport ourselves to the city of Taichung in the late 2000s. Imagine a neighborhood known as the military family's village. Sounds impressive, right? But in reality, it consisted of cramped temporary houses built back in the late 1940s. Time had not been kind to them. The walls were cracked, the roofs sagged, and the youth had long moved on to skyscrapers. The government decided to demolish everything, to level the land and construct a modern residential complex in its place. Residents began to leave, one by one. Silence settled in the empty courtyards. Of 1,000 families, only a few remained. Among them was Huang Yunfu. At that time, he was 86 years old. Imagine this man, small, thin, with kind eyes and calloused hands. He had lived in this village for 40 years. For him, these walls were more than mere bricks. They held his memories, friends, and life itself. He was offered money and a new apartment, but he shook his head. "I won't leave," he whispered. "This is my home." But how can you stop the bulldozer if you're just a pensioner with some change in your pocket? Huang sat in his empty room, feeling bored and deeply sad. Then he took an old can of paint that had been gathering dust in the storeroom and painted a small bird on the wall, bright yellow with a red crest, followed by a cat and then flowers. Wait, he couldn't stop there. He stepped outside and began to color the gray, peeling walls of his house. Red, turquoise, orange, pink. Fantastical animals, opera heroes, astronauts, and whimsical little figures sprang to life on the concrete. He painted every day, starting at 4 in the morning until it became too hot. Soon his house was a riot of colors, but Huang didn't stop. He began to decorate the neighboring abandoned houses, then fences, and even the road beneath his feet. The village that once resembled a set from a post-apocalyptic film suddenly transformed into a living rainbow. Each crack in the wall smiled back with a fantastical creature. In 2010, students from the local university stumbled upon this neighborhood. They were astonished. Imagine their shock. Amidst the gray boxes of the metropolis, they discovered a true psychedelic paradise created by a single elderly man. They took photos of Huang, his artwork, and posted them online. It was an explosion. The Rainbow Village went viral. Thousands of people flocked to Taichung to witness this marvel. The government found itself in a difficult position. Bulldozers were already revved up, but the public rebelled. People began to write petitions. "Don't destroy art." In the end, the authorities relented. They officially designated the village as a cultural site and park zone. The village was saved. Huang Yunfu, whom everyone began to call the Rainbow Grandpa, lived in his village until he was 101. He painted almost until his final days. He proved that beauty is the most powerful defense, and that one person with a paintbrush can halt a steel machine if their heart is filled with enough colors. This is a story about how it's never too late to start creating, and that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places: imagination. Story number 30. A bird that forgot how to disappear. Well, we have reached the conclusion of our journey. You see, I pondered for a long time about what story to leave for last. I wanted something that would make you exhale and feel a sense of hope. In our vast, noisy world, it is easy to conclude that the fate of a single small creature doesn't carry much weight. But reality is a delicate thing. Sometimes, the future of an entire species may rest on the wings of just one bird. Let's transport ourselves to the Chatham Islands. This tiny archipelago is located in the Pacific Ocean, nestled somewhere between New Zealand and Antarctica. The year is 1980. The setting is harsh: stormy winds, chilly ocean sprays, and dense, low woodlands. It is here that a quiet drama unfolded. Ornithologists, led by Don Merton, realized that there were only 5 black robins left on the entire planet. 5. Imagine that scale. Not 5,000, not 500, but just 5 small birds as black as coal that could fit in the palm of your hand. It was the brink of extinction, a death sentence that nature was already prepared to sign. But there was an even more serious issue. Among those 5 birds, there was only one female capable of reproducing. Scientists named her Old Blue due to the color of the band on her leg. Frankly, the odds of saving this species were zero. Biology textbooks state that such a small population is doomed to genetic extinction. Everyone was waiting for the end. But Don Merton decided that the textbooks could wait. He devised a crazily ambitious, incredibly risky plan. He wanted to become a godfather to the birds. When Old Blue laid her eggs, Don and his team didn't just sit by and watch. They took the eggs from the nest. You might ask, why? This seems insane, but not so fast. Don knew a clever trick. If a bird's first clutch is removed, it will immediately start building a new nest and lay more eggs. His aim was to double the number of chicks, but who would incubate the first eggs? Merton placed them in the nests of other birds, the yellow-crowned parakeets, and astonishingly, they accepted the orphans. The parakeets incubated the robins' eggs, fed them, and protected them from the wind. It resembled the strangest farce in the animal kingdom. Don Merton lived in a tent, in the mud, under the rain, spending months away from his family. He literally hand-reared each chick. He carried them across the woods in boxes, warmed them under his jacket, and monitored each flap of their wings. And then, a miracle occurred. Old Blue turned out to be remarkably fertile and resilient. She lived for 14 years, twice as long as typical birds of her species. She became the matriarch of the current population. Today, there are over 300 black robins living in the Chatham Islands, and all of them, absolutely every one, are descendants of that very Old Blue. This is a story about how biological laws sometimes yield to the determination of one individual and the will to live of one little bird. When you look at the photograph of Don Merton with a small black bird resting on his palm, you see not just a biologist. You see a moment when a human decided to rectify a mistake and repay a debt to nature. With this, our cycle of 30 chapters comes to an end. We spoke about houses in the rocks, worlds trapped in bottles, singing stones, and brave children. These stories are like those tiny black currents. They may be small, yet they contain immense power. The power of wonder, which makes our lives a bit brighter. Thank you for journeying with me. Remember, the world is filled with wonders. All it takes is the ability to look. Or sometimes, just waiting an extra 54 years, like that Japanese marathon runner. Our archive is always open for those seeking the extraordinary in the ordinary. Until we meet again.